Across the bridge by the slow-running water, across the drumlins and down we go. Across to the island we lope the marsh water. Come diddle-dee, diddle-die, diddle-day. Simon could hear the song coming through the floor of the forest. You know, this song from Tales of Paradise Marsh, it was a story of a marsh sloper, of Simon. It was a quest. And in this program, I'm going to be looking at those stories. We're going to be writing some of those stories, the tales of Paradise Marsh. For me, walking through here, it's a sanctuary. And for many years, that's what I would do, just walk through here and enjoy it immensely. But as you walk through, or as I walked through, I began to notice different aspects of it. And I was writing a lot about it. And so while writing about it, I came to know it very well. And then my imagination kicks in and I start to feel perhaps the marshes have their own imagination. Simon could hear the songs coming through the floor of the forest. He didn't know how he could, or even where they came from, but he could feel them thrumming through his feet and sending shivers of light up the staff that he carried in his hand. It was a sounding stick that would be told about in the stories, but to Simon, it was the songs. He knew one day when he heard the marshes singing, as he began to sing those songs himself. And welcome to Tales of Paradise Marsh. Tales of Paradise Marsh, I'm Martyn Kendrick. I'm the author of a book, a number of books, and I've taught writing for many years. But this particular story, this particular book is twofold. One, it's about this writing life stories and other fictions, a writing method that I've taught to so many people. But really, it's about my experience with this writing over 30 or 40 years and what it's done to accelerate, amplify, provide me with a way to enter the creative state willingly, mindfully, consciously, thoughtfully. And it's led to a terrific journey, which you saw in the opening theme of being at Paradise Marsh, being at the marshes in Hamilton, which is a playground of mine, as I will have said in the opening. It's a playground of the imagination. And I could say that this story is really about the boy who wandered through the marshes and fell in love with the world, fell in love with nature, fell in love with what I discovered, what he discovered, playing, relating deeply in the natural world, in the marshes. Now, I'm going to take you on journeys my own into the marshes and hopefully stimulate you to take your own walks into the wild and at your table begin to write down your experiences in nature in ways that will surprise you, I hope, and they will become your own stories. Like here on this program, we're going to be writing the actual tales of Paradise Marsh, telling a chapter, singing some of the songs, introducing some of the characters, Gnuff, the Gabald, and Dern Castle, and the place of sparkling waters, and you know, the hills of red stone, red clay, and the sounding stones. All of these mythographical, mythological transformations of landscape, say Hamilton Marsh, Hamilton watershed, into tales and stories. And I bet you have them too.
The story is about a boy named Simon who walks with a stick through the marshes, gathering the songs of the flower and streams. He's from Westdale, a small village in Hamilton. In real life, he's from Westdale. There, he's just a small kid, walking like any school kid would walk through the marshes. But while he's walking with his stick, it's a sounding stick. So he hears, through his sounding stick, different sounds he's not heard before, and he begins to see creatures who kind of pop out through this veil. And see, he's been able to see through the veil because the sounds in the stick allow him to see this. This boy ends up walking with these animals into the magic marshes. they transform for him, and he begins meeting all these creatures, the old ones. The old ones live on an island, and on the island they have created a sanctuary, a place where they have coupled long ago in olden times, and they have been waiting for a time when the restoration would begin. And they're quite separate from the real world, but they know of its workings, and the real world is encroaching in upon it. The real world, what surrounds the marshes, are the West Dales, or Tumbledown, or the hills of red clay, or here, the desolate swamp. This surrounding area where the old ones gather is the playground for the play. It is the area in which the story takes place. Now you'll note that all of the names in the marshes, the real names, Westdale has become the Westdales. The Cootes Paradise becomes Paradise Marshes. There's an island, just a small island, which has become the gathering place. And so all of the names in the area, the real area, the kind of geography of the area, have been changed to fit into what I call a mythography. And it's in this mythography where there's a battle between the good and the bad, between the mutant marshes and the magic marshes.
The neat thing is there are many parts of this story, and we're going to be taking journeys out into our landscape, say to a labyrinth, to places of great beauty in the landscape like the botanical gardens. A very, very important part of this story, botanical gardens. And some of the figures, real and imagined, like T.B. McQuestion, an I think underrated, magnificent being whom anyone speaking of the marshes, any ecologist in the Hamilton area, any of the great artists in the Hamilton area, and any of the restorers and naturalists in the Hamilton area have a debt, have an obligation to recall, and I would say revere, hold this man T.B. McQuestion and his vision for Hamilton up, and to literally become bold once again like he was, and to reimagine our landscape as a place where we can all live. So while these stories are fictional, or while there are fictional tales, there are also the real tales that are embedded in this landscape directly as a result of that man's public imagination, which executed in the landscape thousands of acres of art.
The Marsh Sloping Society, there's a group of people in the House of the Guardians just outside the marshes who are connected with the marshes and the old ones and the magic ones, but not quite. They are outside in the real world, and they have this guild, and they belong, and they call it the House of the Guardians. And the only way you get in there is to make marsh sloping shoes, which will allow you to carry on water, which is muddy, silty, you sink down. But you make these, and you have to have low technology. You can have nothing, and they should be made out of the materials of the marsh. And very few people have made these successfully. But a few have, and these become the models for all the others who are going to go marsh sloping. And when you build a pair of shoes in the House of the Guardians, and you can lope across the water, lope across to the islands, when you built them, made them yourself and crafted them, others come and look at them and say, they kind of celebrate the membership of another into the guild.
Interestingly, I want to tell you a bit about those marshes because if you become a writer, you learn to relate with all things within the landscape that you're living. You learn to relate inwardly how you're feeling about what you're seeing, and outwardly what you're actually seeing, and observing that really precisely. And that combination of amplified attention and observation brought back to writing itself in an uncensored way, a method I'll tell you about more as we go along through this program, awakens an inner mind, an inner consciousness, a kind of, well actually we know now through the science, it's triggering the right brain and creating a flow state. So what this writing does is send you or me as writers into a state where we're automatically creative. I began this writing, it was 20-minute writing, so I could see I wanted to go naked to the table. I wanted to go to the blank white page and have nothing in my mind, not another writer, nothing but the event I was describing. And I began to describe trees over and over again. I began to describe flowers, waterways, and I observed them very carefully. And this observation led to many different streams of conscious writing that were very informed. I could see that I was seeing deeply. I could feel what I was feeling in the moment of discovering a depth of relation in nature that was changing me. And honestly, I felt at the time, while I'm writing in this way, while I'm listening in this way, while I'm seeing in this state of mind, I become attuned to a deeper level of something that's going on in us all the time, an inner story, an inner response to everything that's around us. And we notice that we are connected. In this connection, I could hear what trees were saying. I think that sounds a little odd, but I'm going to support that a little bit along the way. I could listen in a way hard to describe to the water, to the flows of water, to the songs of birds, where they were in the landscape, and how one, the water, related to the other species within that landscape, and that I was part of that connection. So I became, as the indigenous people would say, one with all my relations. And that was happening without any context. I'm just a North End boy from Hamilton, arriving in my own mind when I ask certain questions and give myself the freedom to answer them. And that's the key to this writing. What questions I began asking. And the way those questions were answered changed me from a writer who was seeking to tell tales of transformation, tell stories that would, like Tolkien, come up with some imaginary realm you and I, me, could enter, and we would be lost in wizardry and, tales. But that wasn't what came, although it did come as a story. What came was maybe the same source that someone like Tolkien goes to, both nature, his British Isles, and I think he went to Iceland and Greenland. They are explored, and his descriptions come from those spaces, but it was the imaginary playground that he conjured in his mind. It was his own inner world brought to life through the listening of his young children, whom he was telling the tales to. So they asked him questions. Those questions derived answers from Tolkien, where he went inward, listening, and came out with these stories. Now, I'm saying this because as I listened, I heard the songs the marshes sing. Literally. I mean, I wrote something about that. If I can, I'm going to recite a poem. It's from the beginning of the book, Tales of Paradise Marsh, Stories, Tales of Paradise Marsh. Tales of Paradise Marsh. I have gone down at dawn to Sassafras Point to watch the sun lift the veils off the marsh. I have seen the moon rippling on the face of the still waters, stars gleaming on the leaves of the sky-arching maples. I have seen the ghost of an old ship by the high bridge where the dead lie buried beneath a limestone cliff. I have walked through the reed beds higher than my head, felt the moss-green mud quaking beneath my boots. I've climbed down the ravine, sat on boulders old as the Ice Age. There I stretch out my arms in homage to the old ones, as circling hawks ride winds through the sun-kissed sky. I have put my face under the cold running water, lower even than the roots of the fallen willows. I have followed the creek and cut across the dales. I've fallen to my knees in dappled light, quietly setting down my walking stick, so I could see eye to eye with a white-tailed deer clothed in meadow flowers. I have seen the snow-white egret and wandered under the bent wings of blue herons, or come upon them waiting in the bog, silent as falling snow. I've claimed one island as my own. A fast-running spring creek hits it from one side, and from the other it catches the swell of water stippling down the escarpment. I have sat on my island at dusk with my friend as the sun sinks below a winter white line of birches. A shimmering sliver of red hovered above the water, and we sat dangling our legs in the glow of it. I have wakened in the marshes. I have chimed, chanted, bowed and bent low to the water, the wise owl and the wind. I have sounded the morning air of the marsh with music, as a gabble of geese come hurling across the sky. I have heard the songs the marshes sing, and wondering long and slow at their beauty, I begin to sing them now myself. Across the bridge by the slow-running water, across the drumlins and down we go. Across to the island we lope the marsh water. Come diddle-dee, diddle-die, diddle-day. The flow state. Often in this process, this program, I will often speak about the flow state because the way of writing that I have described in the book, Writing Life Stories and Other Fictions, the writing method that guided my life journey as a writer and human being, was about consciously entering into the flow state. There's a man named Sitchaheli Mahalye who brought to the world an understanding of flow. It's what happens to a tennis player. When they're in flow, they begin to see that the ball is much larger. The tennis racket moves, glides through the air effortlessly, meeting the ball on the rise, sending it back without any conscious thought, but pure muscle memory without being in the way, allowing the body to work at levels that are actually exceedingly rare. Pool players will find this, tennis players will find this, football players find this, writers find this. It's getting into flow where everything seems to happen effortlessly. You catch the ball, you find the right phrase, a poem rises in the mind. You're flying above the hands of many and receiving a ball and turning, and it looks magical, it looks exquisite because they are in flow. Flow is that time when the right brain has kicked in and the body goes into a flight, almost of fancy. You take the body or the mind out to the edge of its capacities. And what we witness in flow from our great athletes are moments of transcendence, of sublime human capacity. Again, we're going to speak about this as we go on during the program and during some of the processes and the techniques we'll use to liberate, to trigger this state of mind. It's a very specific method to trigger it.
So there's a point in the story where they've crossed the bridge and the young boy has been named. He's Simon, and the fox has come, Clear Eyes, and the heron, Cleus. And they've named him. They sang a song because to enter into the magic marshes you have to have a name, and so they've named him. And he's now traveling, he's marsh loping. The fox teaches him to lope through the marsh. And he says, marsh loping, what is it? And he says, well, just follow me and you can follow my path. And if you follow me through, you'll learn the lope as you go. And so he follows and he kind of trusts him. And he gets to a clump of witch hazel and they're sitting there waiting. And he says, well, how are we going to cross here? Because they've come to an island, a bank. So how are we going to cross here? He says, well, you have to go marsh loping. And he says, what you've just done across the hills, you have to now do in the water. And he said, well, how would I do that? He said, well, I have my own way. And for you, you'd need the lady of the lake to come. Usually, we make a pair of shoes. We make our own shoes, and in the making of them, we are known. Our qualities are known, because the kind of shoe that we make that allows us to walk on the water. And if the lady of the lake would allow those shoes to pass. So it's a kind of test to come across the marshes. And there are many tests that allow you to enter deeper and deeper into the marshes. And the deeper you go, the more your magic increases, say. For Simon, it would be the more he attunes himself to his sounding staff, and so can work its power. And so the marsh loping shoes, he can't make them at this time, but he learns the idea of marsh loping. And what happens instead is the lady of the lake comes and carries him across on the watery cascade that she carries for him, and she crosses him to the island. The others go marsh loping across with their own shoes.
Now, I learned many years later, say now, 30 years later, exactly what it was we did in the workshops in the early days, and I in my writing in the early days, without really knowing, and the writing itself was the teacher. So, for instance, entering this flow state required triggering the mind with a set of images. Images are a gateway, like dreams, to, say, the unconscious, or to a flowing stream of consciousness, which one can listen in on, as if one can step into the flow itself. Now, you can do this by looking back on one's experience, say, in your mind, in my mind. I look back for the experience. And in my mind, I go quiet, I'm listening, and I feel, sense, see something, the memory of an event. Say I ask you, or I asked myself, I'm in nature, I'm in Cootes paradise, I'm down in a space, say Sassafras Point, which pleases me greatly. Physically, I love being there. And I want to Go there, enter that joy of being in nature, be grounded in nature, and I want to be able to carry that feeling and the visions I'm having, the sights that I'm seeing, the observation of nature, water, living beings, my own mind, all interacting together, and it's written across a page. So the blank white page becomes the canvas for re-experiencing, and maybe at an even deeper level, because you're listening, seeing, feeling, once again, so intently, this experience that you usually carry on unconsciously and naturally. And as you step into those experiences more often, you can begin to orchestrate them, choreograph the experience. Or you know to step in and surrender, because you will begin to see, feel, and hear things that are not common. They're beyond your, not common in your experience, not known within the conditions of your learning, not known or taught to you by your family, your school, your traditions. You rise above them. You rise above the unconscious layering of consciousness, your kind of habitual patterns of seeing the world. You break through them. You disrupt them. And by breaking down your habitual seeing patterns, you recognize over time there is another observing mind there that is recording pretty well everything. And as you step into this state of mind, it's like being what the shamans would call, the vessel. You become a literal, you're a channel of creation. The muse appears, and if you stand there ready and waiting for the muse and you're not in the way, you learn to get out of your own way, then the muse, the deeper part of the self speaks. And maybe that deeper part of the self, like the mystics say, like great poets say, like great writers and ecologists say, that at that deeper level, we are all connected, one to another, to the land around us, to the cosmos, to everything. And it's that sense of oneness that I'm going to really bring to experience.
I call what I do, what I write about, and the stories that I write, even the wood, restoration work. And I get that from the story itself. The restoration for me is a way of connecting, and so I teach people when they're writing, what you want to do is get deeply into your own experience, and you want to be able to see, hear, and feel what you're doing, just deeply. What happens generally, what happened to me, what happens to people generally, is you begin to connect with your own experience. So it's that sense of connection that is fairly important in restoration work. So for me, as I'm coming into the marshes, I walk in them. I'm in there in the summer, the winter, the fall, the autumn. And I'm quite, I begin to feel quite close to them because I'm sensing them very deeply. And I'm practicing sensing them deeply, as I ask people to do in workshops. And then to write from that deep sensing of the world. And I find that you connect much more intimately with it, and you begin to hear things differently, see things differently. And I suspect that the imagination is triggered when you do this. And so that if you're having an intimate connection with the world around you, with the earth, plants, living things, sky, and so on, then that comes out in the writing first, and the writing becomes this tool of transformation in a way. And I find, therefore, the work that I do, the writing that I do, or the art that I do, is restoring this sense of connection with oneself and with the world around you.
Marsh lovers, here we are, ready to write, if you are ready to write. And many times you will feel that you're not ready to write. You know why? Because we're all afraid of the white page, the blank page, that black page that sits before us and calls up all our demons. What do those demons say? They say, oh, I can't write. Nobody believes in me, it's just... But you do. You can believe in yourself. And you know why? It's a technique, it's a method. To go beyond those demons in your mind, those whispers and the things that stop you from writing on a page, and to break through that. To begin writing what you see, what you feel, and what you hear. When you do that, it's like you lean over yourself and you see it all again. The way you felt when you were in the presence of something you loved, something you revered, something that made you feel magnificent. And you and yourself at the time of writing begin to feel magnificent, and that comes out in the writing. And that's what we want to bring across in the writing. That's what it's all about, that writing. That's what I want to teach you. That's what this show is about. It's about writing from your heart, writing from what you see, what you feel, what you hear, which is original thought. Think of this. The topic is connecting to the landscape. I'm going to ask you to see what you see in your favorite landscape. But if you begin to write about that for 20 minutes, even 10 minutes, as we're going to do here, you'll begin to see that you have many experiences in your own memories and history. So what we do is we begin to pay attention to what you see. Now, what is it to see? Think about this. Look at your house. Remember what you have seen of your house. What's your front door? What's its color? Do you see that color in your mind's eye? Do you see the windows in the front of your house? Do you see the lawn? What do you see? That seeing is what you're going to be present to while you're writing. What are you feeling? What are the emotions? What are you feeling? The wind against you there on the outside and the inside. And what are you hearing? What does it sound like in the air? Can you hear the birds? Can you hear the wind whistling through trees as well as see them blowing, the green leaves holding creation in your ears and in your eyes?
The wood you see here, it's been in story for a long time. So as a writer, I have written about the characters that the wood represents for years, because it's the tales, the stories from the marshes. But the wood itself didn't come until maybe last year. And I had loved trees, and in the story, trees play a big part, and there are carvers in the stories. Wood carvers or guilds, craftsmen. And so I went up into the woods, far away in East Alberta, up near the Arctic Circle, and I was staying there watching for fires in a tower. But when I get there, I find this wood that is really quite beautiful. It's been fired. It's been lost in a forest fire.